Right now, above your head, there's a war happening. Not with missiles or soldiers, but with satellites. Thousands of them, and the prize? Control over the future of the internet itself. Elon Musk's Starlink already has over 6,000 satellites circling the Earth. Amazon's Project Kuiper is racing to catch up, planning to launch over 3,000 of their own. And they're not alone. China, the European Union, and several private companies are all scrambling to stake their claim in what's becoming the most crowded real estate in human history. Low Earth orbit. This isn't just about bringing Wi-Fi to your campsite. We're talking about trillions of dollars in potential revenue. The power to connect every human on the planet, and the geopolitical implications of controlling the sky itself. So today we're diving into the satellite internet wars. We'll explore how we got here, who the major players are, what's actually at stake, and most importantly, who's going to win this battle for the heavens. Because this war is going to reshape how humanity communicates, and the winner might just become the most powerful company on Earth. Let's get into it. Before we talk about satellites, we need to understand the problem they're trying to solve. Here's something that might surprise you. In 2025, nearly 3 billion people still don't have reliable internet access. That's almost 40% of humanity. They're not scrolling social media, not watching YouTube videos like this one, not accessing online education or banking or healthcare services. And even in developed countries like the United States, millions of people are stuck with terrible internet. If you live in rural America, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Slow speeds, constant dropouts. Or worse, no option at all except expensive, painfully slow satellite internet from companies like HughesNet. Why is this happening? The answer is simple: economics. Traditional internet infrastructure requires laying fiber optic cables or building cell towers. In dense cities, that math works great. You spend $1 million running cables, and you can serve 10,000 customers. But in rural Montana, where houses are miles apart, you might spend that same $1 million to serve 50 customers. The business case just doesn't work. Telecom companies have been promising to fix this for decades. Remember when every politician promised broadband for all? Yeah, that didn't happen. Despite billions in government subsidies, the rural internet gap keeps getting worse. And globally, it's even more challenging. How do you bring internet to a village in the Amazon rainforest, or a nomadic community in Mongolia, or a remote island in the Pacific? Traditional infrastructure can't solve this problem. It's too expensive, too slow to deploy, and too difficult to maintain. Enter satellite internet. The idea that's been around for decades but only now is becoming reality. Let's talk about Elon Musk. Love him or hate him, you can't deny he fundamentally changed the satellite internet game. Traditional satellite internet, like the old HughesNet or Viasat systems, used what's called geostationary satellites. These satellites orbit at about 35,000 kilometers above Earth. At that altitude, they stay fixed over one spot, which is great, but there's a massive problem. The signal has to travel 70,000 kilometers round trip. That takes time, about 600 milliseconds to be exact. That might not sound like much, but it makes real-time communication basically impossible. Video calls are laggy, online gaming is unplayable. It feels like you're talking to someone on the moon. Musk looked at this and thought, what if we went lower? Starlink satellites orbit at just 550 kilometers above Earth. The signal only travels about 1,100 kilometers round trip, which reduces latency to around 20 to 40 milliseconds. That's competitive with ground-based internet. But here's the catch. At a lower altitude, satellites move fast. A Starlink satellite crosses the sky in just a few minutes. So one satellite can't serve you continuously? Musk's solution? Don't launch one satellite. Launch thousands of them. Create a constellation so dense that there are always multiple satellites overhead, no matter where you are on Earth. People thought he was crazy. The entire satellite industry thought this was impossible. Too expensive, too complex, too ambitious. And then he actually did it. SpaceX started launching Starlink satellites in 2019. 60 satellites at a time, aboard Falcon 9 rockets. And because SpaceX controls the launch provider, they could do it cheaply. Really cheaply. Today, Starlink has over 6,000 active satellites in orbit. That's more satellites than every other company and country combined launched in the entire history of spaceflight before 2019. Read that again. SpaceX alone has launched more satellites than humanity launched in the previous 60 years. And the service? It actually works. Starlink delivers speeds of 50 to 200 megabits per second in most locations. That's good enough for video streaming, video calls, and even online gaming. Users in rural areas are getting faster internet from space than their neighbors get from cable companies. The impact has been remarkable. Ukrainian military forces used Starlink to coordinate operations when traditional infrastructure was destroyed. Emergency responders use it during natural disasters. Remote communities finally have reliable internet. But Starlink isn't stopping at 6,000 satellites. They have approval to launch over 12,000. And they filed applications for potentially 42,000 satellites. 42,000. Let that sink in. For context, there are only about 10,000 total satellites currently in orbit, including dead ones. Elon Musk is planning to quadruple the number of satellites orbiting Earth, and he's already got the biggest head start in history. Now, if there's one thing Jeff Bezos hates, it's watching Elon Musk win at something. So naturally, Amazon had to get in on the action. Meet Project Kuiper, Amazon's answer to Starlink. Announced back in 2019, Kuiper is Amazon's ambitious plan to launch over 3,200 satellites into low Earth orbit. And they are serious, committing over $10 billion to make it happen. Unlike some other players, Amazon has the cash and the know-how to actually pull this off. But here's where it gets interesting. Project Kuiper is playing a different game than Starlink. First, their satellites will orbit slightly higher, between 590 and 630 kilometers. This gives each satellite a wider coverage area, meaning they can cover the globe with fewer satellites. The trade-off is a tiny bit more latency, but we're talking about a few milliseconds of difference, which most people would never notice. Second, Amazon isn't relying on just one rocket company. They've signed massive contracts with United Launch Alliance, Arianespace, and even Blue Origin, which, conveniently, is also owned by Jeff Bezos. They are diversifying their launch options, not putting all their eggs in one rocket basket. Third, and this is the real game changer, Amazon has a huge built-in advantage. Amazon Web Services, or AWS. It's the biggest cloud computing provider on the planet, with data centers everywhere. They understand global internet infrastructure on a scale that nobody else does. Project Kuiper isn't just about beaming internet to your house. It's about seamlessly integrating satellite connectivity with OEAs. This creates a powerful global network for businesses, governments, and regular consumers. Imagine a shipping company with container ships crossing the Pacific. Right now, they hit dead zones with no connectivity. With Kuiper and OEAs working together, they'd have constant high-speed internet, real-time tracking, and cloud access anywhere on Earth. That's the grand vision, and it's potentially worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But there's a huge catch. Amazon is way behind. While Starlink has over 6,000 satellites already in orbit, Project Kuiper has launched just two prototype satellites. They plan to start mass production and begin launches in 2025, hoping to offer service by the end of that year. But catching up to Starlink's 6-year head start is a monumental challenge. The clock is ticking, and you can bet Jeff Bezos feels the pressure. But wait, this space race is even more crowded than you think. Starlink and Kuiper are the heavyweights, but there are plenty of other contenders. Let's talk about China. They aren't just building one satellite network. They're planning multiple massive constellations. There's Guowang, a 13,000 satellite project, and G60 Starlink. Yes, they actually named it that, with another 12,000 satellites planned. Why is China going all in on this? Two big reasons. First, they want to avoid being dependent on American companies for critical infrastructure. Second, it's a powerful way to expand their technological influence around the world, especially in developing nations. Then there's OneWeb, a British company that was actually one of the early pioneers in this field, even before Starlink. They hit a rough patch and went bankrupt in 2020, but were rescued by the British government and an Indian telecom giant. Now they have over 600 satellites in orbit, focusing mainly on providing internet to airlines, ships, and governments, rather than directly to consumers. The European Union is also developing its own system called IRIS², with around 300 satellites. Its primary goal is to provide secure communications for European governments and military, but it will offer commercial services too. Even Canada is getting involved with a project called Telesat Lightspeed, which plans almost 300 satellites specifically focused on providing coverage to the polar regions areas that most other networks tend to ignore. And we can't forget the old guard. Companies like Viasat and Intelsat, the traditional satellite internet providers, are scrambling to stay relevant. They're launching new, more capable satellites and trying to compete on service quality instead of just global coverage. It is getting incredibly crowded up there in low Earth orbit. The new space race for the internet is on, and the sky is filling up fast. Alright, let's talk money. Because the economics of satellite internet are absolutely wild. Launching a single satellite traditionally costs tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. SpaceX completely changed that equation. By reusing their rockets and launching satellites in huge batches, they've driven the cost down to roughly $1 million per satellite, including manufacturing and deployment. So for Starlink's current constellation of about 6,000 satellites, that's around $6 billion just to get them up there. When you add in the ground stations, all the development costs and operations, you're probably looking at a total investment of $15 to $20 billion so far. That sounds incredibly expensive, right? But hold on, let's look at the potential revenue. Starlink has about 3 million subscribers right now, each paying around $120 a month. That brings in about $430 million a year. It's a decent start, but it's nowhere near enough to justify that massive investment. But here's where things get really interesting. The total market is massive. There are roughly 500 million people living in areas without good broadband who could actually afford satellite internet. If Starlink manages to capture just 10% of that market, that's 50 million subscribers. At $120 a month, that would mean $72 billion in revenue every single year, and that's just from people at home. Think about aviation. Airlines will pay top dollar for reliable in-flight Wi-Fi. Then there are maritime services. Cargo ships, cruise lines, and fishing fleets all need connectivity at sea. We also have government and military contracts, emergency services, and even a network for Internet of Things devices. The potential applications are practically endless. Some analysts estimate that the satellite internet market could be worth over $1 trillion annually by the year 2040. $1 trillion. That's bigger than the entire current space industry combined. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This market probably can't support 10 different satellite constellations. The economics only work if you have a massive scale. You need millions and millions of subscribers to make those billions in infrastructure costs worthwhile. This means we're almost certainly heading toward consolidation. Some of these companies will fail. Some will merge. And in the end, we'll probably see 2 or 3 giants dominating the entire market. The big question is, which ones will they be? Now, let's shift gears and talk about the real problems nobody seems to be talking about. Because this satellite internet revolution isn't all sunshine and rainbows. First up, space debris. Every satellite eventually fails or becomes obsolete. When that happens, it turns into a piece of space junk, hurtling through orbit at 28,000 kilometers per hour. With potentially 100,000 new satellites being launched over the next decade, the risk of collisions skyrockets. One collision can create hundreds of dangerous fragments. Those fragments can then trigger more collisions in a chain reaction. This is called the Kessler syndrome, and in a worst-case scenario, it could make low Earth orbit completely unusable for generations. SpaceX says their satellites are designed to deorbit themselves within 5 years. Amazon makes similar claims. But we haven't actually proven these systems work reliably at such a massive scale yet. And not every country or company is following the same safety standards. The second problem is astronomy. To put it bluntly, astronomers are furious. These huge satellite constellations are creating bright streaks across the night sky, interfering with telescopes and vital scientific observations. SpaceX has tried to help by using darker coatings and sun visors on their satellites, but it's still a significant issue. We are fundamentally changing what the night sky looks like for everyone on Earth, forever. That's not a small thing. Third, we have frequency interference. All these satellites are broadcasting radio signals. As the sky gets more and more crowded, the risk of those signals interfering with each other increases. There are only so many radio frequencies available, and everyone wants a piece of the spectrum. And fourth, there are the geopolitical tensions. What happens when a country launches its own constellation and uses it for global surveillance? What if satellite internet becomes a tool for propaganda or censorship? Who gets to control the content flowing through these global networks? And that leads to the really thorny question. Who actually owns the sky? International treaties say that space is the common heritage of mankind. But those treaties were written long before private companies started launching thousands of satellites. Is it fair that a handful of billionaires get to fundamentally reshape orbital space for the rest of us? Do national governments have the right to regulate satellites they didn't even launch? What happens when their interests conflict? We're building the infrastructure for a whole new domain of human activity, and we're basically making up the rules as we go along. That's incredibly exciting, but it's also kind of terrifying. So after all this, who's actually going to win the satellite internet wars? My money's on Starlink maintaining dominance, at least in the short to medium term. They've got the head start, the proven technology, and they control their own launch capabilities. That is a massive advantage, but Amazon? Don't count them out. They're playing a longer game. They're not just building a satellite internet company. They're building a comprehensive space-based infrastructure platform. Once they actually start launching at scale, they could catch up faster than people expect. The Chinese constellations will likely dominate in Asia and parts of the developing world, especially countries aligned with Chinese interests. This isn't just a business competition. It's a tech cold war. OneWeb and the European networks will carve out niches serving governments, airlines, and maritime customers who want alternatives to American or Chinese providers. But here's my bold prediction. By 2035, we'll see consolidation. Maybe Amazon acquires OneWeb. Maybe SpaceX spins off Starlink and takes it public. Maybe some of the smaller players merge or get bought out by telecom giants. The end state is probably 3 to 5 dominant players, a US commercial leader, probably Starlink, an Amazon-backed platform integrated with cloud services, Chinese state-backed networks, and maybe 1 or 2 regional players in Europe and elsewhere. And honestly, that might be the best outcome. Competition keeps prices down and innovation up. But too many competitors creates chaos in orbit. Let's bring this all together. The satellite internet wars represent something bigger than just who provides your Wi-Fi. They're about who controls the infrastructure of the future. They're about bringing connectivity to every human on Earth. They're about geopolitical power and economic dominance in an increasingly digital world. Starlink has proven that low Earth orbit satellite constellations can work. They've broken the technological and economic barriers that held this industry back for decades. Amazon and others are following with massive investments of their own. In the next 5 years, we're going to see tens of thousands of new satellites launched. The sky is going to get very, very crowded. And the companies that succeed in this race will wield enormous influence over how humanity communicates. But this revolution comes with real challenges: space debris, light pollution, regulatory questions, geopolitical tensions. We're reshaping orbital space faster than we're developing the rules to govern it, the optimistic view. Satellite internet will finally bring connectivity to everyone, bridging the digital divide and creating opportunities for billions of people. It'll enable new technologies, from autonomous vehicles to Internet of Things networks to real-time global communications. The pessimistic view? We're creating a space traffic nightmare, handing control of critical infrastructure to a handful of companies, and potentially making low Earth orbit unusable through debris and collisions. The reality will probably land somewhere in between. Satellite internet is coming. It's going to change the world. And we're going to have to figure out how to manage it responsibly. One thing's for sure, when you look up at the night sky now, you're not just seeing stars. You're seeing the battlefield of a war that will define the 21st century. So here is my question for you. Would you switch to satellite internet if it became cheaper than traditional broadband? Or does the idea of all those satellites circling overhead make you uncomfortable? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where people stand on this. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the satellite internet wars, smash that subscribe button. We're going to keep exploring the technologies and competitions that are shaping our future, one video at a time. The war for the sky has just begun, and we're all going to be affected by who wins. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.